Hello everyone, welcome to my workshop. This video is dedicated to server CPU testing. We will test a 4 years old Ryzen 5 3600 and 3 CPUs that came out this year. Ryzen 7 7700, Ryzen 9 7950X3D and Intel i9 13900. All of them are amazing CPUs, but we will run them through different benchmarks and see how they behave. I will use sysbench tool, a very simple tool that run under the Linux, right in console. And then I will install Wordpress on these servers and do a benchmark using my VP benchmark plugin. And we will compare the results. We will not just benchmark them without any load. We will do benchmark without load, with a 25% load, 50% load, 100% load, and then we will simulate even 150% load on the server and see how these CPUs and the whole system can hold and how WordPress work under these conditions. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put everything down in the comments. In this simple spreadsheet we will put our data. You can see that the 4 years old Ryzen 5 has just 6 cores and 12 threads. Ryzen 7 7700 has 8 cores and 16 threads. Ryzen 9 has 16 cores and 32 threads, and Intel i9 has 24 cores and 32 threads. And this situation is because this CPU has 12 power cores and 12 efficient cores, and that's why these numbers came up like this. Bogomips is an interesting measurement thing. This is basically a very simple benchmark of a floating point operation that kernel makes when you are booting Linux. You can see that gradually these numbers increase, and this particular number is small because I think kernel took an efficient core which is not as powerful as the power core. So I think you can pretty much ignore this number, but I believe that when we come to benchmarking threads, these 32 threads should be faster and better than these 32 threads because they're not very equal. But let's see the real numbers. First of all, let's look at the sysbench results. I have run these tests myself, and these are just the results. You can see that first of all I've made a test with just one thread. Then I took 25% of all threads, and that's why for the Ryzen 5 it's 3 threads, Ryzen 7 4 threads, and Ryzen 9 and Intel, these are 8 threads. Then I took 50% of available threads for the CPU, 100% threads, and 150% of threads. What is interesting here is this number is a total number for the benchmark. And the next line, this line, is the score per thread. So basically it's the total number divided with the number of threads. I have highlighted these per thread results so we can easily focus on them. What is interesting here, these AMD CPUs, one core has 2 threads, right? Just like a hyper-threading in the old Intel CPUs. And until we use 50% of threads, which is basically the number of physical cores, the score per thread does not drop so much. Yes, when we use only one thread, it's definitely higher when we use 6 threads. Or here for the 16 cores, when we have one thread, it's 62,000, and when we use all cores, it's just 60,000. I would say the drop is not so noticeable. But once we get to 100% threads, basically using all cores and all virtual cores, the score per thread is almost 50% lower. And when we go to 150% of available threads, it drops even more significantly. But this is not true for the Intel CPU, and this is because of their efficient and power-saving cores. We don't know, and we cannot force use of the efficient cores or saving cores. But on the numbers, once we reach 50% of available threads, and at this point we are definitely using slow cores and fast cores and maybe virtual cores, the score drops significantly. It drops not 50%, but it definitely drops around 30%. While for AMD, it does not drop that much. Maybe it drops 10%, 5-10%. But here it drops 30%. And when we reach all 100% of the threads, 32 threads here, it drops even more. And when compared the drop between the first one, 47,000, and 23,000 at the full load, then it's definitely more than 50%. While for AMD the drop was less than 50%. And when we come to the 150% of all available threads, basically 48 threads, then the drop is even more down. Alright, so these numbers I will share as a document, or maybe have a link, because I hope I will get other servers with different CPUs and we will be able to add them to these results. And now let's go to WordPress and test these CPUs with the WordPress. To be honest, I was not patient enough, and I have already run benchmarks for Ryzen 9 because I felt that that CPU is fast. No matter what benchmark will show, it will be fast. And in fact, I'm very impressed by these results. As you can see, I've run benchmark using VP Benchmark plugin with no load. Basically, it's the plain empty server, nothing on it, no processes, just WordPress, MySQL. I have noted all these numbers. These are the seconds. Then I have simulated 25% load and run the same benchmark. You can see these numbers are a little bit slower, so that's good. Then I have simulated 50% of the load, 100% of the load, and again 150% of all available threads. I have used another great tool called Stress that can generate load and simulate load, just doing some empty loops. And the reason why I have chosen the 25% load, and I think that this benchmark will be very important. This and the next one, actually 50% load, these two, they will be very important because you hardly have a server that runs at 100% load. That is quite unrealistic. Then you basically are having problems with the server planning, and you are heavily overselling the resources, and that should not be tolerated. Let's say that's wrong. And again, the server with no load is also sounds very strange, very rare. You will never have this situation. Some other sites will be running on the server, other VMs running on the server. So these 25 and 50%, these are more realistic numbers. Let's say our servers, they run at around 25-30% load, and we consider that they are full at that moment. Sometimes they peak up to 60%, sometimes even higher, but the average is 25-30. All right, so let's not waste any time more. I have prepared these WordPress sites on each of the server. You can see the server and CPU type in the URL, right? And we will start benchmark at once and note the results. Let's have some fun. Alright, so the last one is almost done. You could see that at the first Ryzen 7 was a little bit ahead of Intel, but at the end Intel was a little bit faster. Interesting. I would like to say again that right now we have executed tests on the servers with absolutely zero load. Right, so let's see the numbers, actual numbers. Okay, Ryzen 7 is a little bit faster, especially on the first test, half a second. All others, right here, database was faster on Intel. Interesting, half a second faster here, 0.1 faster here, 0.1 faster here. Also, object cache with the Redis is faster on Intel. The download speed was the same. Well, they are on the same in the same server park. And Ryzen 5, the CPU, which is 4 years old, definitely was slower. That was expected, but the file system was fast. Database was okay. Object cache with Redis was pretty much okay, except mixed usage 2.4 seconds here, while it was 0.7 on an Intel. That's 3 times slower. Yes, well, it's 4 years old, and that's why this particular test shows importance of having modern CPUs. Definitely, it's 2 generations back. I have put all the results into the table and color scale them so we can see who is a winner. I have not taken in account results from the Ryzen 5. And basically, it's 4 years old, and you can see the numbers are definitely out of the equation. It's several times slower. If we compare 3 modern CPUs which came out this year, looks like so far the Intel i9 is the winner. You can see that it's green a little bit more than everyone else. And the next step is that we will add 25% load for each server and run tests again. As I mentioned before, we are adding extra load on the servers using stress command, 25% of the threads. So for Ryzen 5 it will be 3 threads. For Ryzen 7 7700 it's 4 threads, and 8 threads for the Intel i9. Well, this guy has 32 threads in total, so 8 threads, that's exactly 25%. Okay, and now we are ready to run our benchmark again, and let's see who will be the winner. By this time you can see how faster Ryzen 7 is over Intel 9. Alright, it's done, and you really could see that Ryzen 5 was not so much slower comparing to Intel 9 when it's under the 25% load. What do numbers show us? Right, we can see that numbers have increased. That's normal. I will let you compare them yourself and see how it looks like. All the numbers are here. What we see is Intel does not win almost anything. In every point it's way slower. And what is interesting to see is that Ryzen 7 is more in a green area than Ryzen 9. Here you see these two benchmarks. Ryzen 7 did better. And as you can see, Ryzen 5 is actually not really that far away from Intel 9. So we could basically take these scores into consideration, and wouldn't look so bad. It would still look bad for the Intel. That's quite terrible and bad, if you ask me. Maybe on the next step, when we will create 50% load, basically occupy 50% of the threads, it would be even worse, and maybe we will actually take in consideration 4 years old Ryzen 5. Now we are starting a stress tool to generate extra load with 50% of threads that is available to each of the CPUs, and we will run these benchmarks again. Okay, ready, start. Unbelievable, Ryzen 5, which is 4 years old CPU, has finished first. Well, faster than the Intel 9. The first one was, of course, Ryzen 7. Sorry, guys. Let's see the numbers. Unbelievable CPU here is faster than on Intel 9 13900. Definitely it's not handling the busy tasks correctly, or maybe all the busy tasks, all busy fast cores are occupied with our stress test, but definitely nothing much left for the PHP in that case. Okay, let's put it in a table and see the colors. And here we have the numbers and the colors, and again Intel is the last one. I haven't marked Ryzen 5 because I truly think it's not fair to compare 4 years old CPU with the modern ones, but you can compare the numbers yourself, and you see that the gap between Ryzen 5 and Intel Core i9 is not that much. And again, amongst AMDs, the Ryzen 7 7700 is the winner here. That's a great job. Let's head next and overload the servers up to 100%, which means for the Ryzen 5 this is 12 cores, 12 threads. For the Ryzen 7 this is 16 threads, and for the Intel i9 32 threads. In fact, while doing this, we can see that it's a little bit unfair, because Intel runs 32 threads while Ryzen 7 runs only 16 threads. Although physically they are different CPUs, and that's why they run different number of threads, and we are basically measuring how efficient a single thread is, because as I mentioned many times, single thread performance is the most important thing for PHP, for WordPress. If you have a server with a fast single core performance, your WordPress will be fast. Alright, so the stress has been started now, and we are ready to start the next benchmark and see the results. Numbers are here, let's put it in our table. Situation here is predictable. Again, i9 is way behind AMD CPUs, and numbers for the Ryzen 5, they are quite similar. To be honest, to be fair, we should say that as Ryzen 9 and actually Intel i9, they both have twice as much threads as the Ryzen 7. Would be honest to say that this CPU, Ryzen 9, can do twice as much job as Ryzen 7 and still be on the same level of performance, I mean per thread. So probably would be more fair to compare with a similar load. I don't know what similar similar number of requests, but let's put 150% load and see the same numbers and see how servers will behave. 18 threads for Ryzen 5, 24 threads for Ryzen 7, and whooping 48 threads for the Intel. After thinking a little bit, I have decided to do one more benchmark. And now we will do benchmark and load servers equally. I mean, just 4 threads on each server, each 4 of them. 4 threads on each server will be busy with some loop, and we will run the benchmark and see how they will behave. And since I haven't yet done the benchmark for the Ryzen 9, you can see 4 windows here, and we will start all of them more or less at once and see how they will finish. So right now they equally have a little bit load. Ryzen 5, for the Ryzen 5, 4 threads means much more than for the Ryzen 9 or Intel 9. But at that level we can kind of simulate equal amount of requests coming from the customers, from the visitors, and that way we can actually see how much capacity CPU and servers have under the same load. Let's put them in a table and compare all 4 of them together. Just I thought, AMD Ryzen 5 cannot compete with this year CPUs. Just cannot. Although the first benchmark shows that Intel Core i9 has problems. If you ask me, my impression is that if you want a very fast CPU in general, but you don't really have many tasks, basically your server will be idling, but when it has to do something, it has to be done very fast, then Intel Core i9 will do the job. It sounds terrible. You have 32 threads available, but all those 32 threads put together are slower than 32 threads from AMD. You can think and do some conclusions yourself for your tasks, but in my case, for our hosting needs, I will definitely suggest my company to choose either Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9. My personal preference would be probably Ryzen 7, because even under the very heavy load it was showing good results, and the cost for the Ryzen 7 is around 30 or almost 50% less than the cost of the Ryzen 9. That makes a difference. Benchmark is over. Results were pretty much predictable. Once again, Intel i9 struggled a lot, and even the 4 years old Ryzen 5 was faster. But please bear in mind that Ryzen 5 has only 6 physical cores and 12 threads. Ryzen 7 has 8 cores and 16 threads. And the Ryzen 9 has 16 cores and 32 threads. Basically, Ryzen 9 can do much more than the Ryzen 7. But obviously, it also costs a different money. I hope this was helpful. If you have any comments, if you want me to test another server, put it in comments. I will be happy to do it again. Take care and see you in the next videos.